I'm pleased to introduce our partner, Mr. Bruce Sherman from the BBG, who will set the stage for today's session and future sessions. Mr. Sherman is the Director of Strategy and Development at BBG. He joined the BBG in 1996 after 12 years at Radio Marti, the broadcasting service for Cuba. In his role today, he directs formulation and execution of BBG strategy, leading a team of senior managers and planners across all broadcast groups. He has overseen development of the 3 5-year strategic plans, including the most recent 2012-2016, and is their principal author. Sherman has also played a central role in launching new strategic initiatives for the Muslim world, including Radio Sawa and Al Hurra TV for the Middle East, and Radio Farda for Iran. These and other strategic initiatives since 2002 have expanded the BBG's worldwide audience from 100 million to over 185 million people weekly. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Bruce Sherman.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back at Gallup, this time to be focusing on Nigeria. In my role as head of our Office of Strategy and Development, I'm a cheerleader for what we do around the world, of course, our global broadcasting efforts, and our research program in particular. We have been doing global research for more than 10 years at the BBG. We're very proud and happy to be partnered with Gallup now in this enterprise. The focus today on Nigeria is incredibly relevant, timely, given what's happening across the trans-Saharan Africa, northern Nigeria, the entire country of Nigeria. This is an incredibly rich data set. I've had a chance to read the report, obviously review the PowerPoint presentation that you're going to see today. It's going to be a challenge to get through everything in an hour. There's so much information in here. So I'm going to be very brief just to say that this information is critically important to what we do in developing communication strategies to reach the people of Nigeria. This data gives us an opportunity to distinguish across differences in Nigeria between North and South, between different religious groups, different demographic groups, men and women, different age groups, and of course in how people are using media. A big takeaway today is the rise of digital media, the use of mobile phones, mobile web, rising in considerably across the country of Nigeria and in the important northern part of the country. It also highlights the ongoing importance of radio and TV broadcasting. So it's an incredibly rich data set, and it's one that we'll continue to mine after today, again, for the purposes of directing our broadcasting. A final note, we do these briefings as a public service. We want to share with the broader community what we're learning about media environments. These are focused not on our performance. We do very well in the country of Nigeria, but this is not about us. It is about the media environment, and we're hoping to share with you information that you will find useful. We are continuing this series on a monthly basis. Next month, we're going to be focusing on Burma. And so we welcome you to come back and participate in that session as well. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Chris, and we'll get into the presentation. Thanks for coming.
In the interest of time, I'm going to introduce our next two speakers at the same time. My colleague, Dr. Bob Tortora, will begin, and then we'll be followed by Mr. Bill Bell from the International Broadcasting Bureau. Dr. Bob Tortora is the Chief Methodologist and our Africa Regional Research Director for Africa. Tortora has developed sampling frames and data collection procedures across the continent. He has spent significant time in Africa establishing fieldwork operations. Dr. Tortora has had a distinguished U.S. government career, with his last post being the Deputy Director of the U.S. Census, where he was responsible for the statistical and survey methodology for all U.S. Census Bureau programs. Additionally, he was responsible for the development of statistical and survey standards and career management and training programs for mathematical statisticians and survey methodologists. He's widely published on topics from statistics and sampling to multicultural research. Mr. William Bell oversees all audience research activities for the Voice of America and the Office of Cuba Broadcasting. Bill founded IBB's Audience Research Department and now leads a team of research professionals managing more than 70 projects a year worldwide. Prior to assuming this position, Mr. Bill served as Deputy Director of Affiliate Relations for VOA and as Deputy Policy Manager for the former U.S. Information Agency's WorldNet satellite TV service. Bell began his career as a Foreign Service Officer, serving as Cultural Affairs Officer at the U.S. Embassy in Cameroon and as Deputy Public Affairs Officer in New Zealand. Mr. Bill holds master's degrees in international relations from the Fletcher School of Public Diplomacy and in survey methodology from the University of Maryland. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Bob Tortora.
It's a pleasure for me to be here this morning, and I hope that I can provide you with some useful information and that we can have a discussion about the topic after the presentation. So here's our country of interest, Nigeria in West Africa. You all know where that is. What I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about the survey design that we used, give you a sense of what are the big broadcast media in Nigeria, talk about what kinds of programs do Nigerians want to listen to and watch on TV, listen to on radio and watch on TV, and delve a little bit into what Bruce was talking about, looking at some of the demographic differences that Nigerians may or may not have in terms of what they want to listen to or watch. And then talk a little bit about when Nigerians listen to radio and watch TV, and look at the share of who is listening and watching. Look at some demographic differences in terms of share. And then I want to conclude really talking a little bit, showing you a little bit of data from the Gallup World Poll in 2012. We've surveyed and we have data so far for 13 countries. We'll end up doing about 30 countries this year in Africa, 35 countries in Africa this year. But show you a little bit of data from sub-Saharan Africa on penetration of mobile phones and internet. We hear so much about how that penetration is so large in sub-Saharan Africa and such a big growth market. And here's this will be some actual data on penetration rates. I'm gonna push all these up here. I think it'll be easier for you just to see these. So in essentially March and early April of this year, we conducted a nationally representative survey of 3,000 Nigerians, 15 and older. It was face-to-face interviews. We interviewed in 5 languages, and we did a random route procedure to select households. We stratified by population size, then picked primary sampling units randomly within those population strata, and then did a random route procedure within the selected primary sampling units to select households. So we had a representative sample of households, and then within each household that was selected in the random route procedure, we used the Kish grid to select at random an adult 15 or older. We used about 100. We used exactly 100 interviewers in Nigeria for this research. We had a pretty hefty quality control program where our supervisors accompanied interviewers on 646 of the 3,000 interviews and did recontacts on 762 respondents. And overall, the response rate was really pretty good in my experience in working in Nigeria, of 82%. So I think there was a lot of interest in the topic. It was a topic that connected with respondents. We covered all of Nigeria except for a small area called Kano Municipal. Small area in Kano that there were some issues with the Boko Haram at the time, and so we didn't send interviewers in there. So I want to talk about broadcast media. It still is the paramount source of news in Nigeria. You can see that the top 3, there's really no statistical difference between the top 3 of radio, TV, and Friends. So there's a lot of news going around, people talking to each other. And it'll be interesting to see the digital systems as a source of news. It'll be interesting to see how that grows over time. Here's the total weekly reach for radio and TV. It's broken out by households where the respondents speak mostly Hausa at home and respondents that speak mostly another language at home. You can see for all three of these breaks, for Nigeria, for the Hausa-speaking households and the non-Hausa-speaking households, there's a significant difference in terms of the weekly reach for the two media. Radio still is the primary source of news. It's significant in all three of those breaks. And if you look at TV, the Hausa-speaking households are significantly smaller than the non-Hausa households in terms of 7-day reach. We asked Nigerians about what they would like to listen to on the radio or watch on TV. Had several topic areas, and the top two that come out across Nigeria are religion, or health and healthcare information, and religion. Really the same percentage, 81, 84%, no statistical difference between those two. Then it drops off significantly to education, and then again drops off significantly to human rights. And then you have just a variety of topics from after human rights, you have political news in Nigeria, all the way down to travel news at 28%. Well, how does that break out when you look at either the Hausa-speaking households or the non-Hausa-speaking households? I don't know if you can see it, but there's a line here, this green line. So everything to your left of that line, those are significant differences between the Hausa and non-Hausa speaking households. Everything to the right, those topics to the right of this line, they're really not significant. So and interestingly, the non-Hausa speaking households, they have more interest in all of the topics to your left there, except for religion, where the Hausa-speaking households are significantly more interested in religion. You can see there's some pretty big gaps in terms of the differences, too, in these topics. Well, what about when are people listening to the radio? You can see that the peak really occurs here between, I think it's 7:30. Let me just get this right. Between 7 and 8:30 in the morning is the peak viewing, where 40% of the people that listened to the radio yesterday listened between 7 and 8:30. That share is over 40%, or that percentage is over 40%. And if you start looking at share of who's listening at that time, you see that really the predominant audience most of the day are males. Males are the ones that are really listening to the radio. And if you look at it, again, here's a north-south break. So it's the three northern provinces versus the southern regions, northern regions versus the southern regions. Again, it's the north that has the larger share in terms of listening to the radio. That's essentially a Hausa, non-Hausa breakout too, although there are some Hausa-speaking respondents in the South. Here's what I call a look at it by subjective household income. So we ask a question about whether the respondents have enough money, if they don't have enough money even for food, or if they can buy food but not clothes, or they can buy food and clothes but can't buy any appliances, all the way down to a category where they can buy a house and everything we need. And so you can quickly see that really it's the lower subjective income folks that are listening to the radio. So it's the group that can buy food and clothes but can't afford appliances. That's the largest share of the audience. the higher the subjective income in terms of being able to afford cars, appliances, or houses even, that's the lowest share of the audience all through the day, essentially. So, well, let's switch to the other big media, and in terms of news and information in Nigeria, and that's TV. And we can look again at for the people that watched television the day before, what time did they watch television? And here the peak is between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. So radio is the morning peak, TV is the evening peak. I think that makes a lot of sense. We can look at share. Here's by age group, and you can see that it's again really it's the younger folks, people that are 44 or younger, that are watching TV, have the bigger share of the audience almost all the time during the day, and it's those 45 and older that are not really have the smaller share of TV during the day. I want to switch now and really help segue over to Bill and what he's going to talk about in terms of digital media. This is from the Gallup World Poll in 2012, and we have a question on the World Poll. We actually have the same question on the BBG survey. Do you yourself have a cell phone or a mobile phone? And so you can see that for these 13 countries, these are the ones we've completed so far this year, that we have data back on so far this year, that Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa have the highest penetration at 71%. And you can look down at Ethiopia and Burkina Faso have the lowest penetration at 38%. And certainly Ethiopia is not a surprise to me. When I travel in Ethiopia and I buy a SIM card and any calls I make, they are clearly the most expensive country, it seems like to me anyway, in Africa to use a mobile phone. I think that's because it's a national telecom and there's no competition, so it's expensive, and I think that probably really does hold down the penetration. And by the way, the median here of these 13 countries is Ghana with 57% penetration. Here's access to the internet in the last 30 days. This is a pretty long period. So you have Kenya the highest at 30%, and again Ethiopia and Burkina Faso the lowest at 5% and 4%, and the median actually is in Mauritania at 19%. And then what we in Gallup call the super connected in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, people that actually have a mobile phone and have access to the internet. It's probably not a definition that you use around the world for super connected, but that's what we call it here in Gallup. And there, again, Kenya is the leader at 28% of the population having both a mobile phone and have access to the internet in the last 30 days. And not surprisingly, Ethiopia and Burkina Faso are down at the bottom, with a median again at 15% this time in Mauritania. So I want to end there and turn it over to Mr. Bell.
Good morning. We've been hearing anecdotally for a number of years now about the tremendous take-up of digital technology in Nigeria. Year after year, we do surveys there, and we wouldn't see that in the data that came back. This year, we saw it, and with a vengeance. This is by far the most striking finding of the survey that we conducted with Gallup's help in 2012. So I'd like to spend some time this morning sharing with you the findings of the survey as they relate to the digital ecosystem, if you will, in Nigeria. These are the main points I want to make and leave with you today. There's been a huge growth in connectedness via digital media in the past couple of years. In previous years, we'd seen a huge gap between House of Speakers and others with respect to media access and access to digital media in particular. While that gap remains, it has narrowed quite considerably. And particularly in the mobile side, the growth in mobile ownership across the Nigerian population is almost entirely attributable to the growth of mobile among House of Speakers. We see very strong internet use across the board, 20% say they've used the internet in the past week. And you can see in Bob's data how that compared to other African countries. Nigeria is in the upper tier there. But of course, there's a sharp variation by demographic and internet use, and we'll see some data on that in a few minutes. The growth of internet, we believe, is very largely due to the extensive take-up of mobile web, both the growth of mobile phones and the growth of mobile phones that have internet capability and people's willingness to use those. And so we see in Nigeria, what we've seen in many African countries, a paradigm shift, people being introduced to the internet via internet cafes, and then transferring their loyalties to the mobile internet as that becomes more affordable and more available. Mobile is becoming increasingly ubiquitous in Nigeria, even across all demographic groups. More than 50% personally own a mobile. Only those who don't have any formal education fall below 50% in that category, but even among them, a third have mobile phones personally. We see a lot of use of mobiles for activities other than voice calls, SMS, web, social networking. A lot of news sharing. You'll see some very interesting data on that. But let's not forget, at the end of the day, that broadcast media remain the dominant channel for getting news and information. So let's dive into some more specific data. I'm comparing 3 years of data here, and I want to caution you that because of some significant sampling and other methodological differences across the years, these comparisons are not exact, and in fact may be somewhat exaggerated, but there's no question there's been a huge growth both in personal ownership of mobile phones and in past week internet use. You can see actually a tripling of past week internet use since the last survey in 2010. So very dramatic changes indeed on those criteria. When we break things out by houses and others, as I mentioned, there's been a big gap in previous years among those population groups. We can see a convergence on the mobile phone ownership criterion. And as you can see in this data, there's been a big upswing in mobile phone ownership among houses speakers, whereas among others it's been essentially flat. So you see nationally an increase, but entirely attributable to the growth among the houses speaking population in mobile phone ownership. And here are analogous figures for internet use. Again, these are percentages of each population who have used the internet in the past week. And you can see big growth among all Nigerians. The percentage growth among houses speakers is really quite remarkable. Now, again, there's some sampling variations here, so the actual change may be somewhat less than shown on this slide, but there's no question there's been a huge upswing and very largely attributable to the growth of mobile web among the housing population as well as others. So let's delve a little bit more deeply into internet use and how internet is actually taken advantage of in Nigeria. Again, 20% of the population as a whole has used the internet in the previous week. A pretty fair equivalence between male and females in internet use. That's something we don't always see. In a number of countries, males are much more likely to use internet than women. Not so much the case here, but you can see it's very heavily an urban phenomenon. And the big cities, close to 40% now using the internet on a regular basis, which is really makes it a highly pervasive medium in the urban population, much lower in rural, but not negligible there either. And we'll expect to see some increasing growth in that sector as well. Further demographic breakdown, you can see that internet use is primarily a medium of the young and relatively young. Most of the use is among those 35 or under, and very heavy use, as you would expect, among those with higher education, post-secondary education. Over 50% are using the internet on a weekly basis. You can see on the right still a gap between houses speakers and others in past week internet use, but this is, as I mentioned earlier, much lower than we've seen in previous years. So an encouraging finding in that respect. What do people do on the internet? Just about everything. Email, they follow the news, they update their social networking profile, and let me mention parenthetically that in Nigeria, as we've seen virtually everywhere in the world, access to Facebook and other those social networking sites is by far the primary driver of internet uptake. People get on the web because they want to get on Facebook. And so the number of people using Facebook and other social networking sites typically is almost as high as the number of internet users, because everybody who's on the internet is using it for that purpose, among others. One of the things that really struck us, and I think begs for further investigation, is the percentage of internet users who say they post comments on the web and read blogs. These are very, very high numbers by any standard. It's certainly relative to what we've seen in other countries. And we're quite curious to find out more about this, and would like to do some more research on that topic. A lot of people listening to audio and video on the web as well, in spite of the technical difficulties of doing that with the networks that exist now in the country. Where is the internet used? Most people say at home most frequently, but what that in fact means when you delve into the data more deeply is not necessarily using a computer and a hardwire, but using a mobile device sitting at home. In fact, if we really analyze the data closely, mobile is by far the primary means of internet access in Nigeria. You can see here 3/4 say they use a mobile at least some of the time. When you marry that up with those who use it at home, and we'll see a little more on that in just a second, it becomes obvious that the use of the mobile in various settings, whether at home or elsewhere, is the predominant means of accessing the internet. Internet cafes have not disappeared, however, and we know that a lot of people like to use them at least part of the time because there's a functionality of using a desktop computer that's different, of course, than a mobile. There's speed, the ability to print, and so on. So cafes are not going away, but the mobiles are ubiquitous, and that's how most people are going on most of the time. And you can see here the data I just promised you. When we ask people who say they have the internet at home how they access it, almost all say via a mobile, not too many with the kind of hardwire connections that we might think of with our own internet access in this country. So let's talk a little bit more about mobile. You can see some folks using mobile phones in this picture. Here are some demographic breakouts. As I mentioned earlier, in every demographic group, no matter how we break out the population, more than 50% and much more in some groups personally have a mobile phone. Only those with no formal education fall below that threshold, with 1/3 of those with no education, still a big number, having a mobile. What do people do on their mobiles? These are activities that mobile phone owners have performed in the previous week. And again, they do all kinds of things, but texting is by far the most prevalent. Almost 80% of mobile phone owners text at least occasionally. The next category is quite interesting. Nearly 40% say they listen to the radio on their mobile. And what that means is FM radio. Almost all mobiles sold in most of the world, certainly in Africa these days, have FM chips built in. Even pretty low-cost phones have those. And so you travel around, you see people listening to FM radio on their mobile. And interestingly, there are folks who are speculating now that the ubiquity of FM use on mobile is going to cause a decline in the sale of radio sets. There's no hard evidence for that yet, but there's some speculation to that effect, and something we're going to be watching closely to see the impact on the media scene in these countries. A significant number of people say they get information from their mobile operator via SMS, something significant for us as news providers, and of course about 1/4 say they access the internet. So that's a pretty big number. And you go down the list, you can see some viewing of video, but less so, and a few other things here. Let me just jump ahead here. We did some focus groups in northern Nigeria with Hausa-speaking mobile web users. And here are a couple of quotes I won't read to you at this point, but you can see here, they're in the handout, just to characterize some of the motivations that drive people to the mobile web, the accessibility of using it for news, the convenience of it, and the immediacy of it. You can see the fellow below who heard about the Donna airplane crash via a friend on Facebook, got the news immediately rather than waiting to hear it on TV or radio. Which gets us to the issue of social networking. 23% of our respondents in this survey said they'd been on a social network in the past week. Some of the sharper-eyed members of the audience here might contrast that figure with the 20% internet figure I gave you earlier. And what we discovered is that a lot of Nigerians, we've seen this elsewhere as well, actually don't necessarily think of being on Facebook as internet use. And so the actual number of people who've been on the web technically through the use of Facebook or other means actually exceeds the 20% figure that we saw earlier, although many of these people are using the web solely as a social networking platform. Facebook, of course, is the most important platform in that medium. 2Go is another service very widely used in Nigeria, basically an instant messaging service. There are a number of other dating sites that people cited a lot, but I haven't included those here. And Twitter is also up and coming in Nigeria, as we've seen in a number of other African countries. By demographics, things shape out pretty much as you might expect. Higher use of social networking in the big cities and among the better educated population and among the young. Now, we asked about news sharing as well, because that's a phenomenon of great interest to us. And we asked people how often they share or discuss news with other folks in their community. You can see about a third said they did so daily. So we for analytical purposes, isolated that group and asked them how they share news, aside from just talking to people. And interestingly, far and away, the highest means of sharing news was via texting. You can see almost 60% of these folks, these are big news sharers, said they share information news via SMS, and a quarter of them via Facebook, over 20% via email. So there's a tremendous amount of use of digital technologies for sharing news and information, which of course has significant implications for those of us in the communications business. And again, a somewhat similar finding. We asked people if they saw an interesting event that you thought others would be interested in learning about. How likely would you be to do each of the following? Tell your friends and neighbors. Well, of course, lots of people said that. But large numbers of people said I would take a picture and share it with the local media. I'd call the media to tell them about it, or I'd post on a social networking site. You can see here almost 50% said they would post this information on a social networking site. And it's interesting because that number is significantly higher than the number saying they use social networking on a regular basis. So there's a bit of a mystery in there. Maybe they'd have a friend do it or a neighbor do it, but obviously this is a significant kind of top-of-mind strategy when people think about sharing news and information. Now, final slide here almost. Let's not forget that in spite of all this exciting news about the digital scene, that broadcast media is still the most important venue for news sharing. You saw that in Bob's data earlier, and I included this slide here just as a kind of final reminder of that point. The light green bars show people with higher education. The green bars show the rest of the population. But regardless of the group, you can see that local radio and TV stations are at the top of the list here. The question we asked in this instance was, you recall the outcry some months back when the government decided, at least provisionally, to remove the subsidies on fuel prices in Nigeria. It was, of course, a huge news event there. We asked people how they followed the news about that. And everybody put local radio, local TV at the top of the list here. Social networking and the internet, which we expected to be as significant, was still on the list, but much lower down. So when there's a real crisis, a big news event, it's still radio and TV that people are turning to. So a couple of concluding points. I think it should be clear from this data that any communication strategy for Nigeria has to include the digital media component. We're seeing previously underserved groups entering the digital mainstream and quite quickly. Given the primacy of mobile for internet use, outreach in that medium has to be very much mobile-centric. There's a big interest, a big propensity for information sharing. We can take advantage of that as news providers and communicators. But at the end of the day, broadcast media remains the most important avenue for communication.
My colleague Bruce is going to make some a few comments before we get into Q&A. So
just very quickly, I just wanted to observe, as you have seen the presentation of data, as I mentioned at the top, it's an incredibly rich data set. When you see questions related to use of the internet, use of mobile, use of social networking sites, and then you see underneath each of those questions related to how people are actually using these different platforms, you can easily tell that the work that we do out in the field is incredibly sophisticated, and the questionnaires that we administer are quite lengthy. And so it is a great challenge to be able to field a questionnaire in a reasonable period of time before the respondents don't simply drop dead of fatigue answering the questions. And it's a challenge we face out in the field. I just want to underscore that and salute our people out in the field, the Gallup organization and our researchers, for acquiring this incredibly rich amount of data. Again, if you're communicating with audiences in any country, Nigeria in this case, and you realize all the platforms people are using to access information and to share information, it's necessary to go into this level of depth and detail, or you can't allocate your resources, you can't focus your strategies. But it is a challenge. I just want to underscore in doing this in a way that's efficient so that we can get data reliably.
Thank you, Bruce. We've got time for a few questions, so we've got a couple mics moving around the room. If you just state your name and your organization when my colleague brings the mic to you.
Gwen Dillard, The Voice of America. First, thank you very much for this summary of the research into Nigeria. This is very interesting and very useful. Two very quick questions. First, there's a lot of indication that people are very interested in sharing news. But at the same time, I see the figure for people who are interested in international politics among House of Speakers is quite low, about 25%. And by international politics, I assume they mean international news. So what news are they interested in sharing? Is it limited to Nigeria news? Is it limited to Africa news? And anything beyond that is of little interest? And then my second question is, could you talk a little bit about the sophistication of the mobile devices that people own?
Okay. Bob, do you want to take the first one, and Bill, maybe the second one?
Yeah, I'm not sure I heard exactly the question. Was you say what they were interested in sharing? Is that how you?
Apparently there's a lot of sharing news, but little interest in international news. So is their interest limited to Nigerian news?
Yeah, I think most of it is news, political news in Nigeria, is a bigger interest. I don't really have the numbers to compare Hausa and non-Hausa, but I look at like gender. Males are really interested in international news and political news, much higher rate than females. We can go back in and cut it, unless you know the number offhand.
No, we do know from many years of research that the most important news that people rely on VOA and the other international broadcasters for is domestic news, what's happening in their country, because they want reliable information they don't feel they can always get from domestic media, in addition to international news. But when they talk about news sharing, of course, that can cover a very, very wide range of topics, not necessarily political news at all. I can address the second question if you want, although maybe not in as much detail as you would like. You asked about the sophistication of mobile devices. It ranges all over the map, but I think it's important to recognize something that not everybody does, which is that it's possible to use a lot of the technologies we're talking about here today with a relatively unsophisticated phone. You don't need a smartphone to go on the web, and indeed almost all internet use in Africa is done using feature or lower-end phones, not smartphones. Connections are not as good. Things like downloading video or other data-intensive applications don't work as well. But there are a lot of phones out there that are capable of doing most of the things that we're talking about. And the operators have also facilitated this kind of activity by introducing, particularly in the social networking side, versions of Facebook that can be used with very, very simple phones, so you don't need the entire functionality of a more sophisticated phone. So there are a lot of people who can do these things now, as we see from the data.
Okay, right here in front.
Sani Mohammed, Public Affairs Section, U.S. Embassy. A couple of U.S. Embassy, Abuja. A couple of surprises that I would like to get some clarifications on. For example, Nigerian population, more than 50% of Nigerian population are young people. And when I was looking at the demographics in terms of the information or news that they are more interested in, I saw that sports was very low there. And everybody knows this, that in Nigeria, the only thing that unifies the country is soccer. and it's mostly young people, and including people like me. Every Saturday I watch the league in the UK. And so I was surprised to see that sports was low there. That's the first, I don't know whether this really represents what we know. Secondly, the statistics that showed that the information, where people got most of their information during the fuel subsidy protests was from broadcast is also very shocking to me, because we do know that during that time, the social media was the main source for mobilization and for information. I myself, one of my responsibilities is monitoring the news and the news media during that period, and I knew that my daughter was always ahead of me, knowing what was going on because she was on the social media network. And each time I was talking to her, she was already knowing what was going on before I could hear it on radio or listen to it on TV.
Bob, you want to take the first one,
Yeah.
talk about sample design, and Bill, maybe the second one?
Yeah, I mean, it was a representative sample, so it basically reflects the age distribution of the population. But it's low, it's because there's so little interest from the older age group, so it pulls it down overall. If you look at it by gender, sports is significantly higher for males than females. But that age group distribution, it's really the low interest by the older population that pulls it down overall. Clearly sports is of interest in the younger more of interest to the younger population.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I also wouldn't say it's that low. It's clearly in the middle tier of the topics asked about, but also there's an artifact question design here. The question asks, what topics are you interested in? Not what do you like to watch on TV. I think if we had reworked the question, we might have got somewhat different answers in that respect. The issue of social networking, we asked the question we did exactly because our hypothesis was along the lines you're suggesting here, which was that in this crisis situation, everybody is turning to social media to get information. So we asked the question to test whether that was true. And of course, the beauty of doing survey research is you can test your hypothesis with the real population. And we were interested to see that broadcast media still retained its primacy. Now, bear in mind that while social networking is incredibly pervasive and important in certain sectors of the population, you're still talking about a minority of Nigerians who use social networking at all. So looking at data based on the entire population, it would be unlikely to see everybody using social networking in that situation because most people don't use it at all. And indeed, most Nigerians still are not using any internet technology. So it's easy to make inferences from one's own personal experience that in fact aren't borne out among the wider population. I think that's what may be happening here.
Can I make a comment too? I think one of the interesting things with Nigeria is that it's almost balanced in terms of the distribution of urban and rural. The urban and rural population are almost evenly split. As opposed to other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, where you're talking about 70% of the population is still in rural areas. So with Nigeria's low penetration in the rural areas, think about the other countries where it's going to be even lower penetration. And what I see is that the mobile phone and internet providers, they've creamed off the easy part of the population. There's three issues that are facing them: income, infrastructure, and access. And when you get out to the rural areas, you're talking about lower income people, so can they afford to buy a phone? And then infrastructure is there electricity to support it? I may have a battery for my radio, but not for the mobile phone. And then access. Can they actually get signals out there in those remote areas? So I think the easy part is done for these providers, and now they really face a much harder situation in terms of increasing the growth in sub-Saharan Africa.
It's also just a broader reference point, the perception of the importance of social networking and digital media in crisis periods. relative to actual use of media in crisis periods, as we've just seen in the Nigerian case, is borne out in Iran and other places where we also see during crisis periods a public perception from outside the country and even within that people are being mobilized through social media and they're using social media as a source of information. Is balanced against what we see in the actual survey research that overwhelmingly people are still getting most of their news and information from traditional broadcast media and print media to some extent.
Most of the events took place not in the rural areas.
Yeah.
It was mostly the elite, the educated, university students, secondary school students. These were the people who have access to the internet. Ibadan, Lagos, Kano, Kaduna, Jos. When you look at it, it's not the rural areas. So that's just why it's a little bit shocking for me for that particular event. That's what the survey showed, and that was kind of.
Well, your question suggested another piece of analysis that I'm quite eager to do now that you've mentioned this. We'll go back and look at the data only among those who actually have access to the internet, and let's reanalyze it and see how important social networking was among that group, and then we'll get back to you and let you know.
Okay. Adam?
Adam Powell from the University of Southern California. Last September, Dr. Tortori, you released a data set on mobile phone access varies widely in sub-Saharan Africa, was the title of the release. And there was another question in addition to, do you own a mobile phone? It was, have you used a mobile phone in the last either 72 hours or a week, which picked up a lot of use of relatives and friends' phones. Was that question asked again in this survey?
No.
Well, we do have a follow-on question, which is, do you have access to another phone? We record that, but for our purposes, we consider those people who personally have a phone to be the population of interest to us, because those are the ones who are likely to be reachable in some fashion by a mobile device, rather than those who have to rely on another family member or friend for a mobile.
Next question, right here.
Thank you for that presentation. Jamila Feiji from Georgetown University. I'm curious to find out two very important points in your presentation. The convergence of mobile and radio in Nigeria is significant. Most of the young people, I grew up on Voice of America, per se, from northern Nigeria, and now most of the young people actually use their mobile phones, not necessarily to use it for voice because it is costly, but to access radio. Now, do you see the ban on international broadcasting inhibiting the access of international broadcasters, and that may be the reason why most of them are more interested in Nigerian news rather than international news? And then the second question is citizen journalism, the role digital media is playing on citizen journalism. Recently, I conducted a very loose research on Facebook to detect how people, young people especially, because it is over 50% of the population, are using their mobile phones to share news. And a lot of them actually prefer some of the international broadcasting agencies that are allowing them to take media into their hands and do their own broadcasting. So the promotion of citizen journalism as a strategic avenue for them to share information. Do you see that in your research? Thank you.
Bill, do you want to take the first one? And Bruce, I know you've got some good thoughts on citizen journalism.
Well, why don't I take the first one? You can take the second one. How's that?
You can take both of them.
Well, I'll take the first one. The ban on foreign news content in Nigeria is a factor in our ability to secure local affiliate partners that can carry our programming. But we do have some affiliate partners. The type of content we offer through them varies. But as you can tell, there are broad interests in terms of information. So this refers to news, hard news, political, economic news that would be in a typical newscast, breaking news. We do distribute content with limited success over local affiliates. The domestic environment in Nigeria is not entirely hospitable to that type of activity. That said, we have great success still, as you know from having grown up in Nigeria, and you know the use of AM radio and shortwave radio is still prevalent across particularly northern Nigeria for shortwave radio. So the fact that people can use their phones to listen to the radio, FM local, but also, and they still have shortwave radios to pick up our broadcast is very important to us. But we're making inroads in the mobile piece, as you're seeing here, is a major new direction for us that we're seizing. Yeah. Yeah. Well, as you saw from the data, the sharing of information via SMS is very significant. And you also saw that next to radio, word of mouth, or getting information from friends and then followed by television as a source of information, is critically important. This is an underexplored generally area for most observers of media consumption and the sharing of information in societies. In other words, feeding the people who can feed others is a big part of what we do, encouraging that sharing. And I'll let Bill jump in on the second part.
Yeah, we don't see much uptake of MMS at this point, primarily because it's perceived as very costly, and it is in many cases. But you could see in the data huge interest in information sharing. In terms of citizen journalism, that's something that VOA certainly is extremely interested in promoting, and there are folks here, my colleagues in VOA, who could talk about it probably more authoritatively than I can. But all the technological issues that we're raising here obviously facilitate citizen journalism, both in terms of getting information to conventional media organizations and sharing information among local citizens in the country.
Question right here.
Thank you very much for your information today. I definitely learned a lot. My name is Al Murphy from State Department, IPAF. I was looking back at, or thinking about several recent events that just happened, the Young African Leaders Initiative and the AGOA Forum, and trying to figure out, I got a chance to see how social media work well, in my opinion, with radio and television elements to cover events like that. I'm trying to figure out, as far as the younger generation, when you're talking about social media, Facebook, Twitter, such things like that, the age range in the younger category, what is that in the group as far as the youth?
Bill, you want to take that?
You're asking what age is a typical user of Facebook or Twitter?
Right. It ranged from, like, when the gentleman here had mentioned, like in the high school or college levels. I wanted to know, did you go further down, or did you mainly stick with, how do you define the youth as far as the age range? Because I was trying to figure it out in my mind how they relate to
well, you
users.
can see in the data, it's certainly an under 35 phenomenon. I don't have here the breakouts more finely than that, and we don't survey people under 15. But from what we've seen, certainly in other research, it becomes very heavy in the mid-teens, and then certainly up into the mid-20s, especially the social networking aspect of it.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Okay. Right here.
Hi, my name is Nancy Coviello. I'm with the VOA Africa Health Network. And my question is related to the breakout under your question, what do Nigerians want to listen to or watch? And I was wondering if, and of course I was very happy to see that health and healthcare is the highest at 84%. I was wondering if that data was broken down into deeper levels, like do you have specific topics under health and healthcare or religion or education? Do you have breakout by age of interest, gender, and also the type of media they'd like to get this information from or on?
Bob, you want to take that?
Yeah, we didn't go any deeper into other topics, but we can certainly look at, for the broad category, look at a lot of different demographic breaks. I'm going to imagine that there's not very many differences when you start doing that, just because, like, when we looked at the Hausa versus the non-Hausa, they're so close. My hypothesis is we won't see a lot of differences as we look at it if we go deeper in terms of demographics.
Even like you mentioned before, like under sports, you mentioned before, like sports is a higher male demographic than a female.
Yeah.
Would that kind of information is really helpful when
Yeah.
you're targeting your programming, and also age is really helpful as well.
One of the things that I was hoping is that that just talking a little bit about this would get people more interested in saying, okay, let's dive deeper into the data to try to answer some of those kinds of questions. So, yeah.
In the back there.
My name is Leo Kane, the head of House of Service, VOA. Let me first of all appreciate the graphic results that we got from Gallup this year on the House of Service. But I was just wondering whether there's a meeting point between this result that we have this year and peace building in Nigeria. You all know that the country is passing through a very, very difficult period at the moment. And most of the issues on the ground are not even understood by Nigerians themselves. One, because we don't have the infrastructure and the kind of strength that Gallup has to do researches in Nigeria. Two, because most Nigerians do not even believe in the local research results that come out because they tend to reflect some tribal or ethnic inclinations. I was just asking this question 2 days ago to one of my colleagues in Nigeria, whether it is possible to get international polling organizations to throw more light on what particularly the Boko Haram is all about. People are looking for solutions to very crucial problems in Nigeria at the moment, but they don't know where to turn to get the results of research. Is there anything that inhibits, for example, Gallup from doing any polls on, say, Boko Haram, who they are, what it is all about, within the Nigerians themselves giving answers, what kind of demographics are involved in these things, and how this can be deployed towards peace building? That's my question.
We have an article on the Gallup website we wrote a couple of months ago where we looked at just some questions that might be associated with a radical group, and we didn't specifically ask about Boko Haram, but just the kinds of questions about, like, attacking civilians, is that justified? Those kinds of questions, and it was clear that Nigerians, both North and South, did not go along with those kinds of acts. They did not accept these kind of radical ideas as something that should be done in Nigeria. So to me, it's just a small group of people that are, causing this trouble. And I can send you the link to the article. It doesn't really get at Boko Haram specifically, but it gives you some general idea of how people are thinking about that in Nigeria.
Sir, it's an important topic, and it's something that we certainly will add to our list of, whether it be on a future BBG effort or one of our own self-funded efforts like the World Poll. It's something that we certainly would be interested in looking at. And if you have any comments or thoughts on the type of items you'd be interested in, please come see me or one of my colleagues.
Chris, just to add the note, we did have at the end of this survey 3 questions related to the situation, the political situation, Boko Haram, whether violence is ever justified, and the extent to which Sharia law should be the basis for a legal framework in the country. And those are just very few questions, but interestingly, on a survey in which we also had all of these media questions, can be cross-tabulated so that you can parse the attitudes people have about Boko Haram by media use, by demographic, by age, education, and so forth. So even though there are just 3 questions on the survey, we could do a lot of further analysis for you that would get at some of what you're asking about. Not completely, but it would be a start.
We've got time for one final question. Is there one final question? Okay. We've managed to get you in and out of here in 1 hour. I want to thank our panelists. Let's give them a nice round of applause.